What's up, you guys? Welcome to Beard and Flow Fishing Show. I'm your host, Daniel McKinney, and today I want to talk about fishing techniques that I've caught the most bass in my whole life. One in particular, but several others that's helped me out, that catch a bunch of fish, and maybe can help you out. First off, the topic is finesse fishing. So we're using little bitty baits or some slightly larger baits. All of you might know what a stick bait might be. If not, it looks like a pin in silicone form or plastisol. But some might not know that you can use little baits like this guy. Yeah, crappie baits. Well, Daniel, that's too small of a bait to catch a bass. I'll prove you wrong. So, how would you rig up some of these baits? We will talk about that in a separate video. But today, I want to go over some of the techniques that I've used and how I've utilized them, how I've fished them to catch a lot of fish. So, first off, we'll start off with the stick bait. Basically, it's the Cinco, or this is a big bite baits stick bait. I can't remember the name of these, but basically there's not much to it. It's just a straight worm. The Yamamoto Cincos will have this slight curve at the end. So I'm not talking about rigging today, however, you will do this wacky rig, which is hook it in the middle, or you can do it Texas rig, which will be hooking it up and down like this. How we'll fish that? A lot of non-weighted or weighted. So you can get wacky hooks that have a weight, or you can get them weightless. And you can also get them weedless. Another technique would be a drop shot using baits like this little guy. This is a robo worm. Let's see if you focus on that. There you go. A robo worm. It's a smaller presentation, maybe a little more natural, but I don't know if pink is necessarily natural in nature. But it's a little presentation of those guys. All it's going to do is going to be hooked just in the nose here. It's going to float like horizontally in the water column, and you're going to have a weight dangling below this guy on the bottom and it's just going to be kind of slightly dancing above him. So that's one bait there. I also like to use this particular bait. This is a Zoom Z-Drop. This bait is a pretty good bait. It's won some money on the Elite Series tournaments. It's got a flat bottom to help it slit kind of horizontal, but it's got this like cross section there, kind of a tail, kind of a flange here to have the water move it around a little bit, so it has this little dance. And lastly are these little crappie type baits. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting. Tough days, this size bait can catch you fish. And some people think, well, you might as well go crappie fishing. Well, maybe you should. I've caught a lot more bass crappie fishing than I've caught crappie at times. And sometimes it's more crappie than bass. But this, when it comes to numbers, or you just want to catch fish, this guy right here, I have caught hundreds of fish. I've literally sat and caught 100 fish on this type of bait. Not this particular bait. This is new to me. I'm trying this out. These are these Z-Man micro elastic plastics. Those micro finesse plastics. So we're going to try this guy out. Haven't got any experience with it yet, but stay tuned and you'll find out what my results are on this guy. So, which one of these lures have I caught the most on? Crappie jig. Alright, now we'll dive into that one bait as to how I've caught fish doing that. How am I fishing it? Well, I'm taking this little jig and I'm taking a little jig head maybe a little ball head jig with an eyeball, and I'm threading it on there. The eyeball is key. I found that spotted bass love chartreuse colored heads and pink colored heads. Sometimes they want to underspin, sometimes they don't. I'm sure the color doesn't necessarily matter unless they've been munching on that one color, then they'll stop. So you swap colors out, you go to the other. They might like a more natural presentation. It really depends on your lake too. I grew up on a pressured reservoir overrun by spotted bass. So those fish like the smaller presentation, and they like the chartreuse on most days, but occasionally we'd have to swap to pink because everybody was throwing chartreuse that day. The secret got out and everybody was starting to throw it with chartreuse. And the reason being there too, we had a little bit of stain to the water, so they needed something to focus on. So they would focus on that chartreuse and they would commit to it, and they'd be caught. I was throwing it on a light action spinning rod with about 6 pound test. So very, very finesse, guys. You're not throwing this on 10 pound test. Now, if somebody wants to drop in the comments and tell me otherwise, great. I would love to try something new. But I'm mostly throwing this on 6, no heavier than 8. Now that's either straight fluoro or mono, or you could do braid to a leader. Okay? Now, how I'm fishing that, I have found that points are key if they're staged up there. And I've also found that if I can sit shallow, if I'm in a boat, I can position shallow almost like I'm fishing on the bank, and I can throw out deep, and then I'm bringing it back in. I'm not jigging it. I'm not reeling it straight in. I'm throwing it, let it go down. I engage my reel. I'm throwing a spinning reel because I haven't yet got to experiment with bait finesse systems. We'll get to that on another time. But I'm throwing it out there. I'm engaging my reel, and I'm letting it kind of swing back to me, just pendulum back. And what that's doing, I'm using, the important is the head is a rounded head. I didn't mention that earlier. It's a rounded head. Now, why is that important? The rounded head, when it's coming through the water column, that water is traveling around it, kind of like a ball. It's traveling around that rounded head, and it's allowing a little bit of shimmy and a little bit of extra tail movement that you don't have to impart onto the bait. So it's doing it for you. That's why we're not jigging it back to us like this. Most of the time, I'm just throwing it out there, engaging the reel, and then letting it come back, and it's doing the work for me. Just kind of reeling up a little bit of slack, keeping my rod position about 10 o'clock, not all the way up at 12, because you need a little bit of space to set the hook. But you're not swinging for the fences though, because it's a little bitty hook. But about 10 o'clock, and just kind of a little bit of just carrying the slack. You want a little bit of bow in there, and you kind of watch that line. Watch it come back, pick up a little bit of slack, and it's going to come all the way back to you. Now, there's 2 ways of knowing that you got a bite. You're either watching the tip of your rod, and it'll kind of do like that, it'll dance, or you'll see that line jump, and they've pushed it towards you. Or if your line just starts coming towards you, they've grabbed it and started running towards you. So you want to be conscious of your line and keep a semi-slack line. So you don't want it tight, super tight, but you want a little bit of bow in that line. That's the key. So a rounded jig head, and then semi-slack line. Now, I've also found if they're not coming towards the bank, we're going to flip it around. I'm sitting deep, and I'm casting shallow, and I'm keeping my rod tip at 10, and I'm slowly reeling back and letting that pendulum swing back up to me. So it's going to go down, it's going to dip down, and it's going to come back up. And then if you don't get a bite at that time, you're going to cast back out, You're going to start fan casting. Cast from this side to here, to here, to here. And you're kind of limited to areas at times because there might be a lot of boat traffic around you. Or if you're on the bank and you're on the deep side, maybe on the dam, and you're coming back to you, you want to fan cast around. Is there any structure? Cast towards that. So that's what we're talking about, how to fish this little guy. Now, we'll get into stick bait. This is the second one that has caught me the most fish. Primarily, there's two ways, again, like I had mentioned earlier. You can wacky rig it through the middle, and when you throw it out there, it'll fall through the column. It'll just kind of shimmy towards the bottom, and then you pop it up, and it's going to do like that, and it's going to shimmy back down. Again, I semi-slack line with that. I mostly slack line it, let it go out, and let it fall to the bottom. It has its own action. And like I had mentioned, there's a little bit of a slight curve to this. You might see it here. The slight curve at the very tip here, where it comes, what looks like a ballpoint pen, right there. It's very important when you're wacky rigging or even Texas rigging that curve is at the bottom, because when it goes down, it adds resistance and it gives it that key action. Because if you do it like this, you have less action. Now, when I first started learning how to fish one of these, I was fishing it wacky rigged, and I was fishing on a spinning rod, and I would skip it. I found that if I could take this and I could skip it up underneath tree limbs, overhanging trees, and into thick cover underneath docks, and I caught the most fish doing that. The best memory, the most fun memory, I still talk about it today, and it was happened years ago, was when I skipped this up underneath this tree that was laying in the water, and there was sunlight was hitting it just right to where I could see there was fish cruising around inside this treetop, this underwater treetop. It was the neatest thing. I was using a June bug colored Cinco. It was actually a Yum Dinger. But regardless, it was a June bug color, so it's that dark purpley color with that green flake. So I skipped up in there, and I saw my worm kind of dancing down, and then I saw this fish come up and suck it in, and I saw him eat my bait before I could feel him eat my bait. And I quickly reeled down, and I set up. He wasn't the biggest fish. He was probably a 2-pound largemouth, but it stuck with me, and I learned something new, that wacky rig is not just open water. It's not just under docks. It can be in trees. It can be anywhere. There's no limit to where a wacky rig can be fished at. So I was using, I would recommend using 8 at the lightest pound test, maybe 10, 12, because you're going to throw this thing into some nasty stuff. You can throw it in nasty stuff. I would use, the thicker the cover or the wood, or if you're throwing it in wood, use 12-pound test at max, but I would say use that as a leader to a braided line, main line. If you're going to use straight fluoro, straight mono, use 10 or 8. So I promise you can bring fish through some gnarly stuff with lighter line, especially if it's monofilament. Mono has kind of gone to the wayside because of the era of fluorocarbon. I primarily fish the little stuff on monofilament because of ease of castability and affordability. It all gets all kinked up and such. I could spend a few bucks at Walmart or Academy or wherever, and I could strip that off, replace it with some freshly new mono. I'm good to go. And it's abrasion resistant, more abrasion resistant than some of these thinner fluorocarbon lines. Don't get me wrong, I love fluoro, but a good standby is always monofilament, light mono. Now, we'll get into these last two baits. They'll be pretty much the same way fished. These two are going to be your drop shot baits. That's what I'm going to be using as drop shot baits. I've had more experience with the Z-Drop than I have with a Robo Worm, I hear great things. My father has caught many on the robo worm here, but they are going to be fished the same way. You're going to take, or you can either Texas rig this, or you can nose rig it. So nose rigging is just going to be with a smaller hook, and you're going to go through the very tip here, right there. That's not much. Will you lose baits? Yes, you're going to lose baits. Will you lose fish? Less likely, because look at all this exposed hook right there. The drop shot is one of those to where you really want to pay attention the way you rig it up. And we'll go into a rigging video on another episode. But what I'm mainly going over is your techniques, your finesse techniques. This right here will be fished in mainly open water, especially with an exposed hook. You do not want to fish this in heavy cover such as wood or grass, anything like that, because you're going to snag and it's not going to be a great day on the water. So what I would recommend then would be a weedless option, would be taking a smaller hook and Texas rigging it, pushing up onto that hook, and then taking your hook and sending it here. I don't have one in hand, but you're going to be rigging it through the length of the whole bait, and your hook couldn't. I would recommend probably like a size 1 hook, straight shank hook. Robo Worm has their own called rebarb hooks for this. Also, another great option would be the cover shot hook by Owner. They're a good option too. I've had a lot of success with that hook. I've used it for just regular worm fishing as well, so I would recommend it as well. So that's for the drop shot. What you're going to have down below it is going to be your weight. I don't use much more. 3/16 is going to be the heaviest, and that's going to be for very deep water. I'm not going to use much more on a regular basis. A quarter is a really good place to start. 1/4 ounce you can fish in just a few feet of water, or you can fish in very deep water. And how you can control your getting down deeper with a lighter rig, you're like, the 1/4 is not much. Well, you can fish a 1/4 in 20 foot of water if you're fishing light line. Again, you don't want to use really heavy line with these finesse techniques. The heaviest will be with the Cinco at 10 to 12 as a leader. And then with these guys, you're using 8-pound test, sometimes even 6. And yeah, I mentioned 6 on this little guy too. But you can use 6 on this when it really gets tough, or you really want your 1/4 ounce to drop faster. You can lighten your line because it's a smaller diameter, and it'll cut. There's less resistance through the water. So there's just a few finesse techniques. Hope you learned something. Drop a comment in the bottom if you have any suggestions. Did I forget something? Let me know. I want to hear from you. So thanks for tuning into the episode. We'll see you back again next week. Stay tuned. Thank y'all so much. We'll see you.